Welcome Dr. Forrest Harris, President of American Baptist College, our leader for the Revival Series this year. Thank you again, Dr. Harris, for a wonderful sermon, a powerful word. So share with us what led to a homiletical masterpiece like that.
Well, masterpiece, I don't know. But first, thank you for the opportunity to share in this setting and tradition of revivals at First Missionary Baptist Church. I've had the opportunity and blessed to attend on one or two occasions of the July revival tradition. And of the best of revival tradition in the black church, over the years, First Missionary Baptist Church has kept that tradition alive with the great preaching, but also the connection between the mission of the church, the good news of the gospel, and how it shapes the spirituality of a congregation. And to have that done consistently across many years and to keep it vibrant and alive is a great gift that God has given to this church, and this church continues to give to the community. So I want to applaud that here. The pandemic put all of us in another mode of self-reflection, introspection, not only about oneself, but the institutions that we are part of. Myself, in terms of American Baptist College, I also teach at Vanderbilt. And in that period, 18 months, 17 months or so, I had not been in a pulpit on a regular enough basis to get a sense of any rhythm of how I present an idea publicly. The ideas and the reading, the devotional readings, the reading the Bible, reading of textbooks certainly give you content, feeds your mind. But to get those ideas shaped in a way that they are presentable to the public is another exercise, another reflection, because you are preparing for the gospel to be heard by people who are struggling with context and issues, ambiguities in their lives, that it has to have clarity and it has to have connectivity for them to be empowered, or the Spirit to help them know what God is calling them to do. So I've been struggling with that over this period, not preaching, and I preached the commencement exercise for ABC back in May, so I got a sense. But then when you called and asked me to do that, I got scared. I said, I don't know if he doesn't know the preaching that he heard when he's a student at ABC. His machinery needs oiling. And so I didn't let on that I was having that kind of rusty kind of thing. And then going back through my library and things, there are, repeatable themes, ideas, and sermons that you can preach again, but they need serious updating. Because every context makes a sermon old, meaning old if you don't update it to the context, to connect the social challenges to the good news. So at one point, this sermon, not the title is new, Courage to Live. Now, I'm a Thurman reader, and I read Thurman, and Thurman always feeds you with something. And I read this poem by Margaret Stanton that he used in one of his meditations in his book called Strange Freedom. And I said, it stayed with me for several days. And then I was thinking about this nation and all of the things that I saw lacking, but also what religion, in terms of how it had become complicit with the culture and not giving a culture guidance. And then knowing the preaching tradition here at First Missionary Baptist Church and Pastor Emeritus and yourself. And I just want to say to First Missionary Baptist, if God has not blessed a church that I know of in this country with a transition of leadership and profound preaching, if you don't know that, you are not able to, you're something wrong with your head. Something wrong with you. Jackie and I are virtual members of First Missionary Baptist. Every month we send a gift to the church so that we make it legitimate, and he started sending us the communicator. But all of that came to establish a mood, and back home we're going through some issues where we attend church and so forth. And I'm saying, what can I say that speaks to my own challenges, speak to the nation and its challenges, the tradition that produced my faith, and First Missionary Baptist, one of the churches, I think, that can lead the way of helping us understand the transformative ways in which the gospel can serve a people. There are churches all over the country, and I'm not trying to single it out as a merit, but I think there are few churches that I know of that has this unique witness of history and witness of praxis that can now speak and do in this moment things that will bring for transformation in its local area, Huntsville, and in the nation. So that's where that sermon came from. To do that, it takes courage.
Yes.
It's trained at Duke University in terms of graduate study, but it's the Blue Devils. That's their marquee, Blue Devils. But he was trained first on the Holy Hill.
Yes.
So that's where God works things, you know. He gives a thesis and an antithesis. But he's trained. Dr. Scruggs comes out of the training tradition. I mentioned the thesis that he wrote in his dissertation on Harry Emerson Fosdick and Martin Luther King Jr., comparative study of their social consciousness. I think it was Duran Public Press or something, the book. I went back and reflected on that and thought about King's and Fosdick's courage. So what I'm saying, full circle, the sermon that you preach never can be separate apart from your own life and struggle.
Yeah.
And that's where I am right now. With all the things that facing us, facing the school, facing training people and students to have social justice, equity, advocacy, and leadership, something that we have marked at American Baptist College. It's going to take courage, not only with content, but courage to implement it against the things that, you know, are challenges. So that's the background for this sermon.
Over the years that I've listened to your presentation of the gospel, I've always been in awe and admired the richness and the thickness of the way you understand the gospel, that creates this conversation between text of scripture, text of culture, and the meta-narrative of gospel, right? And much of that is being lost, particularly as the great preachers of the American pulpit are now resting in the earth. And how have you cultivated that in your own sense of spirituality? And I think we've got a preview of it as you talked about the matriarchal traditions of your family. And I've heard you talk about your great grandmother Sally and all of that. How has all of that informed your consciousness, even to the point when you preparing for that moment, you know, it helps to shape it?
Yeah, I think the traditions that birthed us, whether it is our character, the traditions that birthed us, whether it relates to our sense of ethics, the persons in our lives and their testimonies that we still remember, have to inform our theology, have to inform our sense of how the gospel came to bear upon them and comes to bear upon us. And if we forget that, or the black church forgets that, and does not infuse that into their homiletics or infuse it into the stories they tell their young people, we lose those stories and those storylines, those faith testimonies, to the point wherein they then can't connect the dots between who they are, who we've been as a people that produced them in their new environment. So that's been my sense of it in my days at Vanderbilt as a student, but also at Vanderbilt as a teacher, professor, you came through, but at American Baptist College. The amazing surprise you get is the young people don't know that story. They don't know grandmama's story. They don't know those stories in the cotton field. They don't know the testimonies to connect them to the new narratives that are coming out. Whether you take the narrative, Black Lives Matter, great, and it's significant, and it is something that America itself has never accepted, because that narrative has never been for America what really matters. But Black Lives Matter has been alive in the faith of black people in their struggle for wholeness and peoplehood since day one. Black life has always mattered against the odds, contradictions, and all the challenges put up against it, and we persevered through those periods, slavery, Jim Crow, and all that, because it mattered. But our thesis was, it matters because it matters to God.
Yeah.
And right now, I don't know what a lot of folk, in terms of the way in which individualism has taken hold of people's understandings of themselves and their success, that they don't have a sense that that which really matters is not just your individual success. What really matters is how you bring a community to transformation.
Yeah.
And because of that, you can contribute to it. So what can I do? What can you do? What can a church do to contribute to what really matters? And I think that's where we are. And thank God for the witness of young people. Thank God for Stacey Abrams. Thank God for all of the public witness that we see happening and that the pandemic has exposed as it relates to this country's commitment to what matters. It exposed that what matters to this country is not the least in the society, not changing systems that could help the flourishing of all purposes' lives. Mm-hmm. And what only matters seemingly is how you sustain power for power's sake in a party, and who's going to be president, or how you keep wealth in ways that keep you at the head of the line.
Yeah.
The black church has shown this nation, and I said this in one of faculty meeting at Vanderbilt somewhere. I said, without the black church, America has lost its savor. In other words, Jesus said, you are the salt of the earth. I said, without the witness of the black church, American religion has no saltiness. We have reminded you. And I said, that's a broad statement, the great tradition, the great classics. I said, show me. Point it out. From Reinhold Niebuhr to whomever you want to point out, that they focused on the core issue of justice for all people in a way that this tradition has. Show me. Bring your preachers on up. I got them, I know, They got great. But look, Brady Johnson at Spring Hill Missionary Baptist Church never went to college, never went to seminary, but every Sunday when he got his juices going, kicking them heels, I love the Lord, he heard my cry and pitied every groan. Long as I live, while trouble rise, I hate. Now I said there's some theology in that, and there is some embodiment in that, although he never went to a Vanderbilt or whatever, but it's my responsibility, your responsibility, to take that long meter hymn of the black church tradition and understand and help people understand why it became the sustaining power for black people's faith. And rather than what we do is getting this performance of it, getting this heightened emotionalism of it, and exciting people on Sunday morning but giving them no praxis on Monday. Zora Neale Hurston says she can't understand how emotional and how strong the black church is on Sunday. But on Monday, all that emotion dissipates. I have to explain that every once in a while to the White Academy.
Yeah.
They love to hear us sing. Fish Jubilee singers, every time they turn around, Fish Jubilee singers is on the platform to sing. We all, and then as they get through hearing us sing and preach, the praxis to change systems are not there. So that's how I integrate what you just said to why I try to do what I do in preaching or in teaching.
Yeah. Now, you have navigated those spaces so well for now over 30 years, teaching at a predominantly white institution, but carrying the tradition of the black church in that space through the Kelly Miller Smith Institute on Black Church Studies. And in the 90s, you led this national conversation between congregations and the academy about what it means to be black and Christian. I think that is a relevant point of reflection and of return for us, particularly in the age where the movement for Black lives has gained steam and is calling people's attention to issues of inequities and disparities, et cetera. Help us, or at least lay out those important theological touchstones to help a black congregation appreciate that theological tradition, as well as be able to fend off the erroneous critique that our pro-blackness is either equivalent to white supremacy's anti-blackness or is anti-whiteness, right? I mean, because I think there are people who have been touched with American evangelicalism to the point that they get to these simple statements of, it's not about white or black, it's about red. I'm like, nah, I'm sorry, I'm still black even after the blood, right?
Right.
So help us with that will give us courage to claim that blackness, our Christianity within it, and to dismantle, again, what you did in the sermon, some of the falsehoods of American Christianity that would make that what it is.
Very well articulated in terms of the issue and the question. When you have, Darius, been socialized in a history that creates a binary, black, white, and all of your narratives and your habits of thought are shaped by that binary, black, white. The end result of your theology or how you attach meaning to your life is representative of that binary. And who has been in control of the narratives out of that binary has a lot to do with how you can reflect beyond it. What I'm trying to say is much of black church culture has been a struggle against that binary. And somehow, what we would call in the academy soteriology, meaning understanding what it means to be saved, comes out of that binary and that narrative of how can people overcome the guilt and estrangement in their soul as individuals. And be appropriate in relationship for God for the afterlife, over and against a theology that focuses upon God's love and justice for the body and its oppressions and the way in which it needs liberation and make it inferior and separate from what the gospel means. And all of a sudden, we struggle between how do you bring those two together, especially in the dominant culture. And we end up in these mental narratives. That's the reason why I read that statement by Oswald McCall. That's one of my favorite readings. You become like the images you love.
Yes.
And the name is written on your brow. too much of whiteness and white America is written on the brow of our blackness. And it's there even in a way that we don't realize it's there. And what you'll find in the tradition of black preaching, slave religion, everybody talking about heaven ain't going there. Heaven. All those ways in which our ancestors found a way to say, no, this can't be the God of freedom. And the richness of that challenge to a tradition that tried to shape it wouldn't even let you read the Bible, had hired plantation preachers to preach to you a certain narrative. But look what God did, working through folk who could not read their names on boxcars.
Yes.
With an imagination about freedom, bringing the sacred from Africa and the diaspora. Somehow God is in the very fabric of our humanity. And we know when we see wrong and right and justice and injustice, and even though it's colored over with a red, white, and blue flag, even though the cathedrals are all over the land, all of that, we still, my grandmother, who was on one of those, my great-grandmother, let me tell you a story. We're on the big tree, Julius, where they're stitching, churning milk. And a fly got in the milk. And I said, Great-Grandma Charity, a fly is in the milk. She just didn't do it, she kept kind of churning. I said, Grandma Charity, don't you see that fly in the milk? Had snuff. So these are the stories I tell at Vanderbilt. These are the stories you tell in the White Academy. She said, nothing. She got her little cup, dipped down a little deep under the fly, through the fly. She said, the fly ain't in the milk, it's on the milk. The fly of white supremacy, the fly of those traditions that don't represent our humanity, they are on the milk. Don't let them get in the milk.
That's right. That's right. That's right. That's right. That's right.
Dip down deep enough. You got to go
That's
deep
right.
because in the psychology and internalized oppression of black folk, you got to go way down deep because the man's ice is still colder than ours. The man's theology is still more relevant than ours. You got to go way down in that cup to get some of that stuff out because it ain't in the milk. It's on it. And the job of the black church is to expose what is in us and what's on us. The gospel of Jesus Christ and the freedom that God gives to every human being is in us. I don't care what they do to us and how they try to orchestrate wealth against us and justice. That's in us. And now the black middle class and its success can choose complacency and silo its success away from the whole nation. And I'm not just talking about black people here. Garner Taylor, Sandra Ray, even Joseph H. Jackson, all of their different approaches to the nation getting the fly off the milk, says there's one thing, that our gospel must have clarity about what it means to be free for God.
Yeah. Yeah.
And once you put yourselves in chains of Americanism, like a Jim Scott, who can't say that this nation has not had a history of racism and racists, to be politically correct, and all other folk who support this conspiracy corruption of government, without naming names, the Cicero statement of 42, they rot the soul of a nation.
Yeah.
And then you got institutions like American Baptist College, Alabama A&M, HBCUs, Oh, they are so without the resources and without all of the things you see at University of North Carolina, at Vanderbilt in place. And black people, what we do to those institutions, we don't see that they are the liberation stations for our young people. I think I just said something.
Yes.
They are the liberation stations for the education of our young people. So why have I split between, when Julius came to me, and I think Walter and somebody, about me being president of American Baptist College? I'm over at Vanderbilt. I'm in an endowed chair. Shoot. Go over to American Baptist College. Ain't got, as they used to say, a pot to, I mean, it was, but your master's emeritus has had an understanding of those kinds of institutions in America, that he led this church and has led his life through the levels of leadership, that if we don't invest in those institutions to produce leaders for our communities and have those leaders serve the cause, the larger narrative of liberation for our people, we're lost.
Yeah.
And this church, and I thank you again for the years of philanthropy and generosity toward American Baptist College and other HBCUs every year annually for how many years past, and it's been many years now, of annual gift of $35,000 to American Baptist College. This church. So long and short, what you just laid on, and this young prophet, ebony faith that he has, this sense coming from the Bahamian culture, and seeing how that worked in your culture, how you had preachers who held up the vision of freedom in that colonial situation. And now serving as pastor here. That's the reason why we need this courage to live.
Yeah. You've been a prophet without honor in our denomination, and have represented the best of that tradition and loved it, even to hold it accountable for something purer and even better. And I'm sure that has come with an incredible strain to want to see what the ancestors bequeathed us, vindicated, nurtured, cherished, and renewed amid the kind of onslaught of personal piety and individualism. But share with us what that struggle has meant as a theological leader, right, within a denomination that doesn't quite always represent the best of what we could do, and that ongoing work now, because you're now ranked about fifth among HBCU presidents in terms of longevity of tenure. You're now in your 21st year, at the helm of the school. Yeah. And share with us that, particularly for Jaron Mitchell, one of our youth, and Nigel Adams' youth, who will matriculate at the school, but as well as for the congregation that is supportive of that witness, why we should continue to support this out of that.
Yeah. Oh, boy. Before I had a sense of the urgency and call to the gospel, I heard your pastor emeritus preach at Mount Zion Baptist Church in Oak Ridge when Dennis Ward was the pastor. I don't remember the sermon in detail more than I remember how the fervor and organization and clarity that it brought to embodying something that was so important in the moment of preaching, but so important to the preacher, that was so impressive to me. And I often wondered about that fervor and passion, how it developed and how it got sustained up to that point, but over the years now, knowing Pastor Scruggs, how it still remains. And I've come to the summation that it has to be that there's a commitment of what is larger than him, larger than us, for the salvation of our people. The salvation of our institutions that have been anchors for us.
Yeah.
No matter how corruptible they may become, how entangled they may become with stuff that really upsets you. The way in which I see it is that we've got to find a way, as best we can, to stay with them, work through their issues. Because once they are gone, and they may be gone in terms of relevance already, but there's always hope for how we can contribute to the traditions that we represent and they represent, even though they don't represent it as well and as best as I wish. So the reason why I've stayed where I've been with our conventions, our denominations, and our black churches, and not just go totally, and you can contribute in the academy. James Cone says he writes in terms of he fights by writing. You know, I can do it through teaching. And that's fine. Kelly Mill Smith Institute on Black Church Study, Kelly Mill Smith, I can tell the story about him. But Vanderbilt as a university gets to have an institute on the black church within it, a black cultural center on the campus, Bishop Joe Johnson, black cultural center on the campus. When American Baptist College is a black cultural center, when the black community is it, and to be replicated on a white campus for the sake of that university to say we are sensitive to black history. I'm saying, wait a minute. So that's the reason why, I like Nicole Hannah-Jones, what she said at the University of North Carolina. I'm tired of that. You know, working all these years to get tenure. I got academic credentials, Pulitzer Prize winner on the 1619 project, and because of CRT, critical race theory, and all this, put it aside, you going to equivocate on whether I should get tenure? Right? Shucks, she could have had tenure at American Baptist College just showing up. You ain't got through all them hoops. Still had the 1619 project right. We are still trying to prove our worth to the white world. And that's Kamala Harris's challenge as well as Vice President of the United States. And her, edges get shown around how she handles that. Because she know and we know, unless that white world approves her.
My.
But when can we approve and affirm ourselves, the blackness? Let me use a word. We call it, the word, ontological dignity.
Yeah.
It's an old big word, it ain't much to it. As I said to a student, it's that you go to as deep as you can go until you can't go no more. And that ontological, that depth is your being. And once you get there, you hear the voice of God, huh?
Yes, sir.
Your ontological sense of self, that rugged ontological depth. And then you discern or have discernment about what's right for your life. So when she said to the University of North Carolina, you have your tenure, it didn't mean as much to me as I thought, right? I thought that was going to make me feel good about my ontological self. No, you can have it. And then all the other great universities started calling her, offering up big packages. And this sister decided, look, I'm going to Howard. I'm going to Howard, going back home to my people. Because there I'm affirmed as a child of God.
Yeah.
And my daughter, who I said graduated from Howard, she said, my degree just went up. Anybody got a degree from Howard University just went up? Rashad Rashad, and now Coach,
Yes.
Coach, all going, look at here, all that richness, all that, now coming back to our place. We've been trying to share it and use it in the white world for the white world to come to see. That's the reason why I'm saying hold on to the black church, black family, black institutions, because we can be the light.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yeah. There might be someone with a question in the congregation. So if you have a question, we have a microphone coming to you. Deacon Betts.
Dr. Harris, thank you so much for your discourse this morning about what's taking place in the community and the thought that goes into that. One thing that maybe it's just a small thing, but why is it that black folks are so willing to go out and join, the white churches, but the white folks don't want to join the black churches?
I mean, you just put your thing on the pulse of the problem we've been talking about right there. Black folk will go because that's got to be the authentic, real way to discover spirituality and why the Bible is really being taught. Have you heard that before? That's where the Bible is really being taught. White folk ain't coming over here. Why? Because superiority and a sense of who we are in our blackness does not appeal to them. Just don't. You can talk about Jesus all you want. Yes.
Another question, and then Pastor E has a question.
Yeah.
Yes, several years ago, First Baptist established a chair at American Baptist College. Do you know approximately how many have taken advantage of that, graduated?
Yeah, I wish I had that statistic at the top of my head. Pastor Scruggs, First Missionary Baptist Church, Huntsville, and First Baptist Church of Capitol Hill established the Body Chair of Excellence. And that Body Chair of Excellence started us with an endowment now that is over moving near $1 million plus. Amen. And that is still the strength of our endowment. In other words, $1 million plus because of the $500,000 that First Missionary Baptist Church here in Huntsville dedicated toward that endowment. In terms of students and impact, it has impacted the whole college in terms of its sustainability. But thank you for having that memory that there's another example of stewardship toward a college that was so necessary at the time and visionary from a black church to help start.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Dr. Harris, would you, going back to the other issue you were talking about just before this question,
Yes.
would you apply Isabel Wilkerson's caste book
Yes.
to that question about why blacks flock to white churches, but whites don't flock to black churches? I think there's some relevance there.
It is. I did reference Isabel Wilkerson's book, The Warmth of Other Suns, the caste system that led to the migration of blacks to the north. And she used three characters, three persons' story to illustrate the different social, psychological dynamics, as well as the existential crisis that they face moving from a hostile south to the north for a better life. And in that migration, in that movement, they were seeking ways to affirm and to have economic support, but the institutions, the systems, the culture kept challenging them in ways wherein some of them equivocated to white spaces, trying to prove one's worth. One of the characters, I can't remember his name, but a doctor, maybe ended up in Houston, wherein, he continued to try to prove his worth, tried to forget about his southern roots, southern, so forth and so on and so forth, but his life was never fully happy and fully complete But there was another character that moved up to St. Louis or moved up to somewhere where she kept on remembering the black dialect, kept remembering all the things that her life represented and still spoke that way, and found that she could affirm herself as herself even in other spaces. I think it always challenges us, Dr. Scruggs, to put in proper perspective the spaces and worlds that will affirm us or will not affirm us, but the spaces that will affirm us only if we accommodate. So if we accommodate to whiteness, they're fine with us. If we let ourselves assimilate into whiteness, it's great. Especially now that people like Oracle, Amazon, and all these big businesses are opening up these jobs for the black middle class and making more money than we've ever made. My son is in that with Lululemon and getting ready to go to Hong Kong to head up their global office. I said, son, that's great. It's wonderful, wonderful. I mean, wow, because you can help me with my shortfall in retirement. It's wonderful. It's wonderful. It's wonderful. But do not ever let that be your last anchor. In other words, don't let that suggest that you've made it. And so he's going through that. So pray for him and the like. But that is what I'm thinking you were referring to, Julius, is that these spaces never will affirm us as fully as we want them to, and when they do, they require us to accommodate to them to the point wherein we don't own our total selves.
My.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, it's on now. Dr. Harris, I agree with what you said fully. Let me just add to the caste, because it seems to me, in the book on caste, takes it even to another level than she does in the warmth of the suns.
She does.
When she talks about the caste system, how you have one in India, how you had one in Germany, how you have one in America. It seems to me she keeps suggesting that America has a caste system. And in a caste system, you are born up here, 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 and here, if you want me to put it in categories. And America does not intend for black folk to get from down here up here.
Right.
As you and I were talking last night, and Pastor talking last night, Barack Obama broke that ceiling.
Right.
He went on up through the ceiling, tore it all to pieces. But even with that happening, white America has not taken the rest of us out of the caste system.
That's exactly right.
And they look down on us and want to keep us, Mitch McConnell and those guys, keep us at the bottom of the caste system, and therefore give no affirmation, as you all have indicated, to who we are. And we got to keep fighting every day to get out of the caste system or to get above where we are. And that's why some blacks go running off to white churches, because they don't affirm their own dignity and their own self-worth and their own self-respect. And whites ain't coming over here because they think they are superior.
That's right.
They're in that caste system up here at the top, so what do they need to come over here to a black church where caste system got us down here?
I think that is so on point. So on point.
In my congregation in Milwaukee, I had a white lady who was coming to worship regularly, and she was dating the organist, black brother, and I'd go to the pulpit every Sunday preaching what I preach, right? And that's what I preached, because it was my conviction irrespective of who was sitting in the sanctuary.
Right.
Right? And so she had questions about my preaching and my sermons and why I was, preaching a gospel of liberation for people, and I said to her, because this is not just a church that black people attend, this is a black church. And there's a difference in this nation, in this day, between a black church and a church black people go to.
Right.
And we've got to be clear about the fact that, just as you said, not just righteousness of soul, but righteousness of soul and justice for the body.
Yeah.
And when they are married together, and if someone is baptized in those commitment waters,
Right.
then they can become a part of the fellowship.
Right.
But that's going to be few and far between.
Yeah. I've got to read and get into the second book that she's written on caste. But she's on point. She's on point. You mentioned baptism. Let me get a statement about that, because I think it's a relevant point to both of you. You just said that, and the black church tradition is how we understand baptism. When Jesus was baptized by John in the waters, baptism was a political statement.
Yeah.
That Jesus was joining up with John and John's movement against the synagogue way of understanding purity and the empire. So you just didn't offer yourself up for baptism, as we say, a candidate for baptism. You are offering yourself up for a movement.
Yeah.
And to be baptized by John associated you with his movement. And you know what happened to John when his consciousness would not allow him to have Herod do what he was doing in his family and incest and so forth. They beheaded John. And you know all the rest of them ran.
Yeah.
Because they said, no, you John's disciples? No. And that's the reason why Peter, when they asked him, are you one of his disciples? Peter said, no. I'm not of his movement. No, brother. That's the reason why they ran. That's the reason why imperialism wants to baptize you. American understanding, that's the baptism. But when the black church baptizes you, and here again, one of my stories, I bring it up in the academy all the time. Go in that church pond out there, Spring Hill, church pond out in the county, old muddy snakes even understood that something sacred is going to happen because they went to the bank. And folk from miles around, I got a picture of it. I brought it to my class. And miles around would come around that pond and watch Brady Johnson baptize us. And he had a unique way of baptizing. Now, we go to the seminary, and they give us their way of baptism. So, in the name of the Father, Son, and bam, and wash you off. No. In obedience to the great head of the church, I indeed baptize you because God said baptize you. Then he goes and do preaching right there. I baptize you in the name of him who healed the sick and raised the dead. I baptize you. And by the time he's gotten up in his height, his zenith indeed I baptize you in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. All that energy got in his hand, he kept you way down. Way down. To the point that your feet came up and they saw your feet. And then raised you. What am I saying? The traditions that birthed our faith was about a movement of our sense of who we were against all that mitigated against us. And he infused that into his baptism ritual. Yeah. Even though he had the theological understanding of a soul for the heaven himself in his preaching and so forth. And, we mixed it in and so. But look here.
Yeah.
When you and I and the churches can re-ritualize baptism,
Yeah.
re-ritualize discipleship, we got something. Get all this white folk stuff out of our system. I'm through.
We have one last question here before we bring conversation to. Oh, where is it? One here and one here. Okay, one here. Dr. Stewart is Dr. Harris's college professor at Knoxville College.
Yes.
So we're glad that they get a chance to share.
President Harris,
Yes. Professor Stewart.
one of the hot issues of the day seems to be this what's called political, escape my mind, critical race theory.
Yes.
Okay. And from a psychological, a sociological, a political point of view, the impact has been discussed quite a bit relative to the institutions of this country, the impact on them. That's explained by this theory. Would you comment on the theory just a bit, and then why white folks become so disturbed about it, in particular about the what they think would be the impact on our educational system, particularly teaching children in K through 12, the impacts of the nature of that theory and its relevancy?
Thank you, Professor Stewart. I hope I got my homework. And I think I invite that question and Pastor Butler and the church to have a larger seminar, larger discussion, dialogue on what it means to be black and Christian around this phenomenon of critical race theory, which was birthed in the law schools and universities, graduate schools. Derek Bell, At the Bottom of the Well, that book, that text, about the systemic ways in which racism is sustained in this country and the legality of that system and how legal structures protect it. That's where it started. That's where it remains. We teach critical race theory in our graduate courses in law still today. Critical race theory has never been a part of the public education system to children. Right. Never has been. They co-opted the term, the nomenclature of it, whitenized it, demonized it as something evil against the American ethos. As America understood or wants to understand that the Constitution is this purifying resource that makes America great without owning America's history under its Constitution.
Right.
That corrupted the very Constitution itself and had to add amendments, 13th Amendment, so forth amendment, to correct what it did not do. So what's happening with white people now who have to look at their ancestors, grandfathers, grandmothers, somebody back there who represents that ideology, that racism, and they can't tell their children that was grandpa. That was grandma. They did segregation. They can't stand it to tell. And one white lady says, we can't have critical race theory and traumatize our children. Traumatize our children. So what should we do about that? White people sometimes are so hilarious. They're so funny. Here it is, all these years, black history and the history of this country as it relates to race, they kind of squelched it, put it, tried to hide it, and all of a sudden you are an expert on critical race theory. And all of a sudden you're writing that nobody in the country ought to be judged by the color of their skin and characteristics of their kid, da-da-da-da. And they think they said something profound. When we've been saying it all along.
Yeah.
Now they're going to say it, and all of a sudden, because you said it's authentic. Well, I think, Professor Stewart, the black church again, in its Christian education program, it's pedagogy of the oppressed is the title. Mm-hmm. In its Christian education program, it can't be just because you have the unified Sunday school lesson series as your curriculum for Sunday school and not add this kind of content into your Christian education program.
Right, right.
That's one place that we can start. Another place we can start is it ought to be some critical race theory in your home, around your table, telling the stories of grandmother and so forth. We have an interracial family, son, interracial marriage and all that. And I said to my sister-in-law, Lisa, when you coming home here, sister, now we're going to talk. We're going to talk. And just know we're going to talk. And it's helped. We still got some more talking to do, but we're going to talk. White folks show up in our spaces, and all of a sudden we can't talk. White folk join this church, and we can't talk. Pastor, now, we don't want to run away. Hell, excuse me. That slipped out, Jackie. No, Jackie, get me. We're going back down Ashes now. Forrest, you shouldn't say that. But wow, we got to change every narrative. Why our paradigm has to change? Why do our pattern have to change when they join our churches? If they join, they ain't gonna change when you go over there. Critical race theory, we ought to be able to talk about it here in the way our history, talk about it the way our ancestors talked about racism and taught us about, because, you know, like you got the Delta variant, you got the UK variant, you got, racism has as many variants as the pandemic does. And the variant of racism we got now, it's going to take some real wise sages like Simeon Hall and Regan Earl to help us understand how that variant of racism of Mitch McConnell now is affecting the way you continue to produce attorney generals like the one in Kentucky.
Yeah.
That's a variant, y'all. I'll produce a Tim Scott. And then we send our students off to these universities and colleges, and if we don't have something to help, they come back crazy too. And then come to the church and tell Pastor Butler, now Pastor Butler, you know, if we're going to be relevant, we're going to have to change. And I know what he'll say. He said, sir, come to the, come to my office, and we'll pray together. And when he gets to the office, it won't be prayer, it'll be blessing him out. Who do you think you are coming back from and thinking you can tell and shape the tradition in a different way than the way in which this church exists? Wow, y'all got me going now, I tell you.
Sister Katie's going to ask the last question before we wrap up.
First of all, I just want to say thank you for being here. It's been your sermon's just been like, wow. But reflecting on your topic, courage to live. What advice can you give to young parents, even grandparents, to their grandchildren, and still their children, about courage to live through this civil war, through this pandemic that we're going? Because sometimes, me myself, I've suffered a loss of my grandson. He killed himself through this pandemic. And so, what can we tell our kids who I have taught personally, brought my children up through the church, through the traditional church. I mean, we grounded. And they have this idea that they can't do it. And now that white America is producing this fear, which has always been there. Now the children are fearful. My grandsons and many other young people, they're fearful, some of them, or they're going to challenge the system where they always have to look over their shoulder. Can you speak to that, Pastor?
Oh, that's another, oh boy, that's so. I did reference the fact that this courage is a constant struggle. Context change and different situations challenge you to the point of reasserting the courage that is necessary for children, for our families, in the face of grief, death, and dying. You mentioned suicide. Suicide ideations, and I'm in a territory, in an area that I have to be very careful because I'm not an expert even to speak to it. But black people in depression and black people feeling that they're at the end of their rope takes courage to get beyond suicidal ideations or thinking about it. And we don't even know how to speak that that's a part of our experiences. Well, one thing that I think black churches should do is be sensitive to the need for counseling and therapy post-pandemic. Post-pandemic is to be aware that we need counseling and therapy as a ministry of the church, that the pastor's expertise can't handle. And that even our friends, we can talk to them about it, but can't handle it. And that has to do with debilitating sicknesses and illnesses. Sometimes they just bring you down, melt you down to the point that you don't have courage to keep fighting. You want to give up. And once you give up on your body, your spirit, your body deteriorates further. That's just at one level. Comes to young people. Fighting the system, but the first person, or first entity that I want them to have courage is to face the truth about themselves. How can we help them face the truth about who they are so that they don't make bad choices? I got a grandson and my daughter, and getting him through his challenges and all the things he tries to mimic in the culture, it takes courage of his parents not to give in to that, to stand strong. Because once they give in, he's lost. When it comes to the point wherein, even in the life of a church, when that church needs you, and you can't offer up what it really needs, it takes courage for you to be honest about where you are in your life in order for you and that church to grow stronger. And Paul gives us a great example when he describes the body of Christ, all the parts thereof. We don't pay attention to the part that we need to until it's hurting us. Can I get a witness? Yeah. Until the part, if it's the toe, or if it's the toothache, or if it's the hand that's been injured. And when I broke my foot about 3-4 years ago, Jackie wouldn't, and the doctors wouldn't let me know how close I was to lose my foot. Got infected with what they call it, MRSA. I didn't know, but every Thursday when I would go to the doctor for him to check it, you know what he was doing? He was having the emergency room prepared for me in case he had to have an immediate decision whether to amputate my foot. Now, I'm glad they didn't tell me. Jesus, thank you, Lord, because, my courage at that point would have been challenged in ways. But my point I'm trying to make to this great question, every level of life requires courage to live in God and God living in us for the best way our lives can serve the larger purpose. And none of us can determine that. None of us are exempt from what life offers. Life is lived every day. Tragedy happens every day. None of us can determine that. You don't get rewarded with long life because you live good, necessarily. You don't get rewarded and compensated for doing good, necessarily. Look at King, 39 murdered. If he, based on his merit and what he tried to offer us, he should be living. My mother's 95, just celebrated her 95th birthday. King should still be here if it's on that basis. But he's dead, assassinated at 39. Jesus at 33. And we are still here. Give me courage to live. That every ounce of life that we have left can be lived to serve that larger purpose in whatever form God chooses for us.
Yeah. Wow. What a rich conversation to share with you. Thank you so much for coming, for proclaiming the gospel, for engaging us in this dialogue. He is truly the most significant person who has influenced my theological formation. His signature appears on my undergraduate diploma. He was a reader of my master's thesis at Vanderbilt Divinity School, for which I got honors, and signed my doctoral thesis at Duke University. Was a reader, and so thank you so much. Preached my ordination service 13 years ago in Nassau. Installed me in my pastorate in Milwaukee.
When you come into your kingdom, remember
So it's always rich to have those who have helped to shape you come and share in this moment. So thank you, Dr. Harris.
Thank you. Let's pastor. Let's celebrate our pastor. He's my pastor. He's my virtual pastor. I call him when I'm needing courage. Right here. And Keisha. We heard them at the table last night in dinner, and we gave you a preview of how they talk at home. Lawyer, pastor, wonderful.
Thank you, Jackie, for your years of partnership in life and in work with Dr. Harris, a professional woman of research, nursing interests, and we're just grateful for them. So thank you to the committee who helped to plan. Amen. Sister Bobby, Deacon Charlie, Brother Sam, Sister Mildred, Sister Kim, Brother Ahmad, thank you all so much for what you have done. Tomorrow evening is the second watch of revival, 7 o'clock. Please come back. Come invite others. We will hear the preaching of Simeon Hall, who is the prince of the Bahamian pulpit. He's going to come in here and share with us the gospel. And I guess I'm not really that subtle. All the preachers this week are ABC preachers. all have been groomed at American Baptist College. So I'm not as subtle as I thought I was. I'm just going, this is that kind of church. Amen. God bless all of you.
Thank you.
Be safe.